In the year 1972, the arcade game Pong hit the market, popularizing video games like never before. By the early 1980s, video games had become a large part of popular culture, with games like Pac-Man and Donkey Kong becoming recognizable titles all across the world. A new technological phenomenon had begun, and male youth in particular were attracted to it at a very large scale. As the years progressed, violence became more and more common in these games, reaching an all-time high with games like 1992's Mortal Kombat and the more recent Grand Theft Auto series. Many adults became worried that the increasing amount of violence found in video games could influence their children negatively. As games featuring heavy amounts of violence and other controversial subjects became more common, public advocates against violent media like lawyer Jack Thompson began opposing them. Recent violent behaviors displayed by youth, such as school shootings, are often blamed on children's exposure to violent video games. But are these accusations accurate? Has there been a correlation between youth aggression and violent video games since their emergence in the late 1970s? Violent video games have been argued to cause heightened aggression in certain children, but these accusations are not justified, as many of the children they do affect have pre-existing mental conditions. For most children, the violent video games are normal or even beneficial to their mental health. Other risk factors involving the home life of youth, such as distant parenting, are much more important in the role of mental health than violent video games. The earliest controversy surrounding video games came in 1976 with the arcade driving game Death Race. The game was accused of encouraging negative psychological behavior and reckless driving. There was little to back these claims up, rather the concern came simply from the fact that this was the first truly violent video game.
Can you imagine if this game actually caused drivers to run over pedestrians?
Holy shit, you're right!
After the devastating Columbine High School shooting in 1999, it was discovered the two responsible for the tragedy were avid players of the shooting game Doom. This sparked a lot of research on a possible causation of aggression from violent video games in young males during the early 2000s. It was discovered that playing violent video games did seem to cause higher levels of aggression in some children. However, these findings failed to establish any proof of a long-term effect, or if any aggression caused was on a serious level. In the 1980s, video games took a huge jump in popularity as the first home console brought the games out of arcades and into households. Since then, video games have integrated themselves as a normal part of many teenagers' lives, with 81% of teenagers having access to gaming consoles. Gaming has now become more of a social activity than is often believed to be, encouraging positive interaction between kids and not aggression, even if the video games being played contain violence. Rather than associating the in-game violence with real-life actions, the video games are more like roughhousing or a competition, natural parts of youth development. Despite the early research linking violent video games to heightened aggression in youth, it has actually been found since then that in the long term, playing violent video games is not harmful, but can actually be beneficial. One study in particular found that crime rates were much lower in areas with video game retailers. This is likely because playing violent video games can act as a substitute for committing violent acts in real life. Because it is considered socially acceptable to commit violence in video games, youth choose to do it there rather than in real life. Playing these video games can also keep kids off the streets where they could be committing real violence. All of these studies show that correlation between violent video games and violent behavior in youth is really just a myth. A myth that unfortunately still many people believe, creating an unnecessary fear of this technology.
Howdy, son. What are you up to on this fine morning?
Not much. Just playing some Donkey Kong Country.
Huh. Son, mind if I look at some of your other video games?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, golly gee.
Professor!
No! Heavens no!
Eat banana, sucker!
Son, you've got to stop playing these games. They're poisoning your mind. I will have none of this. No more video games in my good Christian home. I forbid them.
Are you being serious right now?
Yes. Did you hear what that lawyer Jack Thompson said? If you play violent video games too much, you may start behaving violently. I mean, he did get disbarred, but still! That's it! You are done!
Yeah, Mom. I understand why you left Dad now.
Though it is unclear exactly what does cause acts of violence from youth, it seems to be a combination of many risk factors, rather than it being the result of one thing like video games. What could be responsible instead is issues such as distant parenting, poor relationships, bullying, sensation-seeking personalities, and seeing or hearing violence at home. Humans have a tendency to fear the technology they create. This fear is often justified, as is the case with nuclear weapons and genetic engineering. Many times, however, that fear can be misguided, leading to unnecessary hysteria. Violent video games are one such example of this type of technology. Despite research finding links to aggression, newer studies have shown this information to be flawed and outdated, proving no link between violent video games and youth violence in the long term. So yeah, playing violent video games does not make kids act violently. And if you say otherwise, I will fight you.